I remember the very first time that I got to go into Wang Huiming's shop. I was just wandering around Qingdao. I was taking classes there. I'd go by this weird shop, and you'd see little teapots and bricks of pu'er. I didn't know what pu'er was back then, but I decided I'd just go in and see what it was all about. It was too intriguing to pass up. You go in, you see all these different hallways, and it's intimidating. I just wanted to leave because it was too intense, but I didn't. I'm glad I didn't. I sort of poked my head around and saw all these people. Some of them were texting on their phones, and some of them were watching movies on their little laptops, but not Wang Huiming. She looked at me and she said, come in, let's drink tea." I went into her shop, and there was nobody else there at the time, and she asked me to sit down and drink Tieguanyin. I thought it was green tea. I'd only had green tea and black tea. I learned pretty quickly, though, what Tieguanyin was. I later started bringing a battered old Chinese-English dictionary in, and we'd take turns pointing at different words, and that definitely helped our communication. We hit it off because we happened to have the same taste in tea, and I didn't have any training in tea, but when she saw that I enjoyed the exact same kinds of Tieguanyin that she did, she was very pleased. She was in a tough position. Wang Huiming was a southern Chinese single woman living in northern China, running her own business. And Qingdao is Laoshan territory. Laoshan village is pretty close to Qingdao. They drink green tea, that's it. Maybe some jasmine. I loved it. And Wang Huiming was so excited that I loved her Tieguanyin. Later I found out why. Wang Huiming actually had family in Anxi, in Fujian province, and her family grew tea. So she was excited that I liked her tea. Thus began what later turned out to be 2.5 years of formal tea training with Wang Huiming. What we ended up doing was essentially drinking about 15 to 20 kinds of Tieguanyin, 3 to 4 days a week, every single week for months. I've probably tried well over 1,500 kinds of Tieguanyin, and I have not even scratched the surface. We would both talk about the flavors, write down what we were tasting, and then she would tell me, this Tieguanyin is from 1,000 meters up the mountain. This Tieguanyin is also from 1,000 meters up the mountain, but it was picked on a rainy day. This one was from a mountain right next to that mountain. And you'd start to remember there's this certain something to the flavor, a certain texture that tells you this Tieguanyin is a rainy day Tieguanyin. This one is a sunny Tieguanyin. This one was picked on rockier soil. This one was less rocky. This one was really high up the mountain, earlier in the season, later in the season, on and on. Essentially being able to pick out the tiniest nuances in Tieguanyin. Wang Huiming certainly had an agenda in her Tieguanyin drinking. And I have found, since meeting Wang Huiming, that everybody's got their own favorites, and you start to feel out people's ideals. But my ideal and Wang Huiming's ideal happen to match up. You can get a passable Tieguanyin that tastes floral. And that's very basic. If you get some lilac flavors, that's great, check it off the list. Then you move up a level. You get floral, and then you also get this buttery, creamy thickness. Check that off. Now we're getting into mid-range Tieguanyin. Move up one more level, you get buttery, creamy thickness with the added saffron-like flavor to it. Finally, when you get to the very high level Tieguanyin, you get floral, buttery, creamy, saffron, and finally grassy. And that is a very, very tricky thing to pull off, where the processing of the leaf and the picking was done in such a way that you get the greenness of a green oolong without it tasting grassy like green tea or bitter. So that's the ideal. If you can get that ideal, you're drinking really good Tieguanyin, especially if it lasts. through 12, 13, 14, 15 steepings, and then even better if it lingers in the back of the throat. The Chinese absolutely look for this aftertaste and pay a huge premium for aftertaste, even more than flavor itself. So if you're still tasting that Tieguanyin 20 minutes later, you're pretty close to the ideal. Probably the one thing I learned from her that other people did not embody to the same extent that she did was the hospitality. Tea brewing in China, there's the ceremony to it. It's supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to make good tea, but ultimately, you have to ask yourself, why are you making good tea? You're making good tea for good company. Tea exists to be shared. Tea is hospitality. When you brew tea, you use small cups. You brew it for people. The cups are small to help you taste the tea better, but they're also small so that the host has an excuse to keep pouring tea for their guests. If you go to China and you go into somebody's tea shop, if they don't tell you to sit down and drink tea, they are not a tea vendor. They're selling tea, but they're not serving tea, let me tell you. Every legitimate vendor in China will say, please sit down, drink tea with me. They want to know you, they want to know about you. Just like Wang Huiming asks anybody to sit down, even if they insult her, even if they laugh at her accent, like some people would for being a southern Chinese person in northern China. There is no tea without sharing. There's certification programs in China. You could do them if you really wanted to. You pay the Tea Institute in Hangzhou or in Kunming a certain amount of money, and they'll give you a diploma, and then you can work in a tea house. That's not training. Lu Yu, the tea sage, never got any training, and now he's worshipped as a god. There's a statue of him in the tea museum in the courtyard, and people leave offerings, they'll leave coins for him, and he never got any certification. Tea scholars were never certified. They'd invite their friends over, and they earned respect. They earned respect through brewing contests. They'd bring out their best tea, and whoever could present tea in the finest way, making everybody feel happiest, was recognized as a tea master. I'm no tea master. None of us can really say that we're tea masters. There's so many teas in the world, and nobody will ever try them all. You can drink a lot of tea, doesn't make you a tea master. Ultimately, if I had to go by a title, I'd say after you learn enough, you cease to serve tea, and you begin to serve the tea, serve the leaf. In Chinese, there's Dao Cha and Cha Dao. Different characters, but essentially, the first one is to pour tea. That's basic. Anybody can pour tea. You can go to a school and you can learn how to pour tea, but no school can teach you the second one, and that's the way of tea. That's something you learn by embracing it, something that you learn by making tea for people day in, day out, something you learn by sharing tea with people and watching other people grow. And it's something we're all working towards. For Wang Huiming, and for me, tea is all about sharing. That's essentially why I decided I had to start importing the stuff.